So I'm staring out the window of the helicopter, looking at a pinnacle of rock and ice. Are you kidding me? I say to my buddy Ben, are we really gonna land there? The helicopter circles around once, twice, 3 times, and the pilot is just trying to line up this perfect landing on a patch of snow that's no more than a couple feet wide. As we come in, we're getting closer and closer. I look up and I see the rotor blades inches away from the rocks in front of us. We jump out, I grab Ben again, and I'm just shaking him. I'm like, are you freaking serious? Like, this is amazing. This is like the absolute coolest thing I've ever done. And we get out, the helicopter takes off, and then it's silent. And I stand up, and I look around, and I see these beautiful, white-capped, towering Alaskan mountains in every direction. The day before, we'd been in the exact same mountain range, but it was stormy and it was cloudy. You couldn't even see the mountains at all. It was as if they didn't even exist. And that made me think, why is it that we have to take something away, something as simple as these beautiful Alaskan mountains, give them back to us only a few days later to understand their true value? So the next thing, I jump up, Ben and I, we get closer to the edge. And I remember kind of getting up there, and I look down and my legs are just shaking, kind of like they're shaking right now, actually. And they're shaking, right? And I'm like, I've never felt so alive. And then something hits me. I think about how lucky I am to be there. You see, if it wasn't for February 27th, 2007, the most important day of my life, this memory never would have happened. And the truth is, the story that I want to tell you guys about today isn't about going to the peaks of some high off mountain somewhere. It's actually about the lowest point in my life. Because the truth is, I shouldn't be here, and I shouldn't be alive. So let's rewind a little bit, back to February 2007. I'm studying abroad in Granada, Spain, and I'm just having the time of my life. Getting to meet students from all across the world. I'm studying economics and foreign trade. I'm playing water polo for the University of Granada. I'm feeling like I'm in great shape. Everything's just going incredibly well. One day, I walk back home, just as I always did, and I would go past La Alhambra, this beautiful Moorish fort, and I see the Sierra Nevada mountains in the background, and I go down Calle Recogidas, and I turn right on Camino Ronda, my street. I walk down all the way to number 95, and I turn left. I go all the way to the back, and I hit the 7th floor in the elevator. And I go up to the top of the elevator, I knock on my door, and then I hear, "Bienvenidos, Benito." Welcome, Benito. That was my Spanish name, by the way. And my 75-year-old Spanish host mother welcomes me with this big hug. And I come into the house and I just smell this amazing paella and Spanish food on the table. And I go up and I see Shun and Jose and John, my Spanish roommates, and I join the table just like every other afternoon that I was in Spain. But during this meal, something was different. Something was really different. While I was eating, I started to feel this sharp pain in my abdomen, and that pain started here and it began to radiate around to my back. And at first I thought, this isn't really anything, it's gonna be okay. I've always been healthy, and I didn't think much of it. But as the hours went on, that pain got worse and worse and worse, and I started getting sicker and sicker and sicker and throwing up. Finally, I called Christine, who was the director of our program, and I said, "Christine, I think something's wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital." So Christine, who's one of the most just selfless, wonderful people I've met in my life, came within minutes. And before I knew it, we were off to the local hospital. We go to the local hospital and they do a number of tests, everything from blood tests to sonograms, whatever, x-rays, things like that. And they basically say there's nothing wrong. Maybe you just have a virus. So they tell me to go home, rest up, and I'll be okay in a few days. So I do just that. I go home, but that night things went from bad to worse. I have this really vivid memory, actually, where everyone had gone to sleep. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning. And I continued to get sicker and sicker. And at one point I was literally getting so sick, I just fell out of my bed and I collapsed on this cold marble floor. And the only thing I had to hold on to was this brown bucket in front of me. And I looked into the bucket and it was completely stained red with blood. And I knew something was really wrong. But the weird thing about this, when I've kind of relived this experience recently, is I was kind of afraid to ask for help. I was kind of afraid to call out. I could hear myself calling out, but I was almost embarrassed. I didn't want to wake anyone up in the house, so I just sort of kept getting sick the rest of the night. That was not very smart. Anyways, the next morning, Encarnita finds me, and I'm passed out on the floor in the apartment. She calls Christine, and Christine comes again and takes me to a local clinic. And the first thing the doctor does is he takes 2 fingers and he pushes them deep into my abdomen, and then he releases very quickly. And I just remember the most excruciating pain. Probably one of the worst pains I've felt in my life. And he says, look, something is obviously wrong. It looks like something's ruptured, something's going on. You have to get to the hospital right away. So we run out of there, we get in a taxi, where I think we went through like every stop sign and stoplight Granada even has. And we get to the hospital, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God, like this is all about to be over. It's all going to be okay. But then they do a series of tests. They continue to do these tests, and then an hour goes by, and then 2 hours go by, and then 3, and before you know it, 8 hours had gone by, and they'd done nothing. Finally, Dr. Castillo, this 29-year-old Spanish doctor, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, he comes in and he says, Brint, we can't wait any longer. You don't have any time left. We actually have to operate it. The only problem is we don't know what's going on. So he's like, we're going to have to do an exploratory surgery, and you have to sign this little piece of paper to say it's okay. And at that point, I'm like, are you kidding? Like, I'm going to sign it. Let's just get this thing over with. And the next thing that happens is I get rolled into an operating room, and I look up, and there's these kind of steel drum lights above me. And I hear someone behind me says, breathe deep. I breathe in, and then the lights go out. The next thing I remember, I wake up and I'm in some kind of like state of disillusion. I really couldn't tell where I was, if it was day or if it was night. And I saw all these little silhouettes of what I later figured out were nurses running around the intensive care unit. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm finally out of this surgery, everything must be okay. So I try and lean forward, but I can't. So the next thing I do is I crane my neck because I want to see what's kind of down and out in front of me. I look down and I see this bandage that goes all the way around my abdomen, around to the backside. I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty bad. Then I look down and I see a tube coming out of my right side and into a pouch below, and another tube on this side into another pouch below. And I notice there's actually a tube going into my nose and down into my stomach as well. Then something really weird happens. I had this kind of urge, I needed to blow my nose. Of course, right? And, so I reach over to the bedside table, I grab a Kleenex. I bring it to my nose, I breathe in, and I try to blow my nose, but I just can't physically do it. And this is like the weirdest experience, something I've done a million times, something I've just taken for granted. I couldn't physically blow my nose. The days that followed didn't get any easier either. I quickly found out that I had a severely ruptured appendix, peritonitis, and the trauma had been so great to my abdomen that my intestines were completely paralyzed. Literally, my system was entirely shut down. And the only thing keeping me alive was a small little tube that was running into my left arm into a little vein on that side, giving me the nutrients and the liquids that I needed. I couldn't eat or drink for the next 21 days. The thing was, every single day, Dr. Castillo would come in to my room. And every single day, he would say the same thing. He would come in with his little stethoscope, and he'd put it on all different parts of my abdomen. And he'd be listening for these sounds. He'd be trying to figure out, is the engine of Brint's system, is it actually going to get going again? And every single day, he said the same exact thing. And I can hear it like it was just yesterday. He would say, Lo siento, Benito, pero no hay ruido. I'm sorry, Benito, Brint. No. But there's no sound. And at first I thought, okay, there's no sound, it's okay. The first days were fine. I'd wake up every morning and I'd listen to some pump-up songs, a little Third Eye Blind, semi-trumpet. I'd be like, I'm gonna get back to, I'm gonna be fine, this is gonna be great. But every single morning, and as the mornings wore on, it got tougher and tougher, and the news continued to be, there's no sound, there's no sound, there's no sound. And I got weaker and weaker and weaker, and I remember just thinking to myself, my whole life up to that moment had been about inputs and outputs. And maybe many of you in this room can relate to that, but I always thought if I studied really hard, I'd get a better grade on the test, or if I worked harder practicing water polo, I'd become a better athlete. But those rules completely changed in Hospital Clinico. It was the first time in my life where I completely lost control. It was the first time in my life where I started to lose hope. One afternoon, I remember I went into the bathroom. This was 2 or 3 weeks later. I lost about 40 pounds. And I went up to the mirror. I remember looking into that mirror, and I didn't recognize the face looking back. I had lost so much weight. I was so emaciated. I couldn't even recognize myself. I remember being so frustrated and discouraged, and I just went back to my bed, and I just started crying. I just completely lost it. I completely lost it. It was probably the lowest point in my life. It was a point where I really lost hope, where I thought maybe I'm going to die in this hospital. But then the most amazing thing happened. Luis. So Luis was my 56-year-old Spanish roommate. He was one of the most positive, energetic forces of a human being you can imagine. He came right over and he smiled, and he actually started crying with me. He brought over his entire family. Literally, his family had come to see him, and he brought them all over to my bedside to comfort me. You see, Luis was just that kind of guy. Always smiling, no matter what the news, always smiling. And one of my favorite memories of Luis is actually, he just had a really bad surgery for cancer, for colon cancer. And he'd missed Christmas and New Year's. He'd been in the hospital for 3 months. And one morning, the nurse comes in, and she says, this is right after surgery, she says, Luis, I have some yogurt for you. You want some yogurt to get you going again? He looks at her and he's like, yogurt? Are you kidding me? I want some tapas and beer. And sure enough, they brought him tapas and beer, and that was just the kind of guy that Luis was. So days went on, and I think Luis gave me some of that hope to get back. And a week later, I was finally released from the hospital to get medevac back to the US. And I remember walking down those corridors, the same ones I'd been wheeled in only a few weeks before, and walking outside and just literally seeing like daylight for the first time in what seemed like ages. And I looked down, and again, my legs were sort of shaking with excitement, shaking that I had a second chance. So from there, the story actually goes on, but I'll fast forward as quickly as I can. I get medevac back to the US, halfway over the Atlantic, 30,000 feet in the air. I actually have another severe complication. The plane almost has to turn around to come back to Spain. But at that point, I'm like, no, we're going to make it. We have to get back. I want to see my family. I want to, I love the US medical system. It's awesome. And so we land in Philadelphia. There's an ambulance waiting for me on the runway. And it continued, setback after setback. 2 months later, I actually had another major surgery, another kind of emergency situation at Duke when I was trying to just catch up and graduate on time. And that left me actually with the scar that you can see here today, from here to here, which reminds me every single day about this experience. Now, as I came up on a year after my appendix had ruptured, I was finally getting back to full health. I don't want to say full health, but I was finally, gaining my weight back and starting to be okay. And at that point, I remember thinking, I just want to forget this experience ever happened. Like, I don't ever want to think about it again. I don't want to revisit it. It was just too painful. It was too traumatic. And then Christine actually gives me a call one day, and she says, Brint, the anniversary of this day is coming up. What are you doing to celebrate? I heard that, and I was just like, celebrate? Are you kidding? Like, the last thing I want to do on this earth is celebrate what had just happened. I want to forget it happened. But in the coming days, I sort of thought about that, and I was like, maybe she's right. So I started this tradition that I've actually been doing for the last 6 years called Life Day. Now, Life Day, what it's been all about for me is just appreciating the simpler things in life, bringing some of my closest friends and family together to celebrate life, and to maybe give ourselves an excuse to do something we might never otherwise have done. Examples over the last 6 years: being front row center court at the Duke Georgia Tech senior night basketball game, going to the Vancouver Winter Olympics in 2010, flying an aerobatic biplane. Yeah, I flew a biplane upside down. It was awesome. Actually spending 3 weeks with my grandmother while she was dying from cancer but hearing some of the most amazing stories about her life during that time, even heli skiing in Alaska. I think there's a couple things that I've taken away from this experience that I just want to share with you today, some learnings that I've had. First, celebrate small. I learned to celebrate small. When I first started doing these life days, I thought it was all about kind of checking things off of a bucket list. I thought the bigger the better, you know? Maybe we can put more pictures up on Facebook, but as I realized that's not what it was all about. You know, sometimes I think just finding little joys in life, whether it's having a dance party at 2 a.m. in Area 4, or you know, having dinner with your roommates, or even this last life day, which was one of the coolest life days ever. It was just simply 15 of my Sloan friends making dinner together and telling stories. I realized how important that is. The second thing I realized is the legacy of Luis. Because Luis taught me that we all have this unbelievable power to have a positive impact on other people. And I don't think I'd realized that before, or at least I definitely underestimated it. If you think about it, every single interaction you have with someone, you can choose to smile or frown, you can encourage people or discourage people. And those are moments in which we can positively affect others. And especially in a community like Sloan, I think that that's so important to remember. The final thing that I want to leave you with is this experience taught me about how quickly things can change in your life. Literally, within a 24-hour period, I felt like I was on top of the world. And the next thing I knew, I was on the bottom. And I think what I've taken away from that is there's so many expectations that we have, you know, our parents have of us, our friends have of us, and it's easy to sort of live somebody else's life. But at the end of the day, what I've figured out, and I think is so important, is that we have to figure out whatever it is that makes our legs shake, and we've got to go do that with all of our hearts. Thank you guys so much for listening to us.